The dystopian or post-apocalyptical setting is not very common among most anime narratives, and mostly with good reason. Production value plays a large part into making each scene feel authentic and robust with each background frame. After watching this show, I can safely say I was more impressed at how expertly integrated such values were made into a moe slice of life show. Girls' Last Tour summed up is essentially 24 short films and 12 episodes, but each segment is written with a lot of wit and tons of ideas to unpack while or after you watch events unfold. A lot of these ideas are our main characters analyzing pretty quote-unquote big ideas, but somewhat centralized, and highlight how insignificant humans really are. The scale of environments and the set pieces that surround our characters play more into the story than most shows can really dream of. If there's a specific concept like photography being discussed, you are more than likely to see shots specifically catering to photogenic landscapes and beauty that can be captured even in the bleakest of circumstances. Most backgrounds are just jaw-droppingly gorgeous, but there are some shots where the darkness of the lighting in certain areas makes it look ugly and not clear. It's not like it hinders the show too greatly, but it is something to take into account about its consistency. But nonetheless, I think a lot of effort went into this show, and for what it's worth, the results speak for themselves. I usually harp on the fragility of most contemporary characters, especially in the slice of life genre. They feel weak, worthless, and unmemorable. To an extent, that argument could be made about our characters. You and Cheeto feel only like catalysts and plot devices for the author to share their thoughts on the ideas they cover. Although they do provide some value to the show by themselves, the focus is more on the grandeur of the world, history, and its future, not so much the strength of its characters. I think it was actually a smart move to go this route in some ways, because the narrative is so focused on making you feel insignificant along with the pair that you almost forget that they are barely above one-dimensional as standalone individuals. The characters are not separated all too much for the duration of the show, which kind of makes them rely on each other to develop. For a moe slice of life, the amount of development I got from this show is more than enough, especially when comparing it to its contemporaries. When it comes to the sounds that make up this world, I think a job well done and a pat on the back is in order. Usually in such a bleak and empty world, you would fill it with something like ambience and pretty solemn tones to pair, but that's not really the case here. Most of the music is more gospelized and mellow. This is mostly attributed to the characters themselves. There are a lot of sections in the episodes where you just see them driving their little car in a gigantically sized environment in a pretty melancholic mood. But the only thing you hear is the music in the background and not really the sounds of the world. They feel like little montages, and I like them. But when the show wants you to hear the emptiness of the world and hear the barren wasteland around them, you will definitely hear roaring snowstorms and the clanging of rusted metal uninhibited by music of any sort. Speaking of visuals, a short talk on the visual presentation. The shot composition is really creative actually, and gets better with each episode. You'll see a lot of weirdo positioning for like a split second, but that eccentricity is what makes it so fun to watch. You don't really see this all too often. Overall, pretty cool ways to make you feel like you are a part of the show rather than just a viewer when we are in more grounded scenes. Going back to the depth of the series a bit, I was actually quite surprised at the variety and interestingness of the many questions the show is excited to pose. What does it mean to be alive, and how do we confirm our own existence? The idea of the afterlife and how it plays into the ways we live our lives, whether we choose to accept that idea as truth or not. Finding purpose, allowing that purpose to consume you, eventual consequence, and overcoming it to find new ones. All these ideas and more usually go beyond what is necessary to make sure you are at least bare minimum interested in the implications of such ideas. The strategy here is to make you feel like a member of the group, and to an extent I felt like I was a member no more than you or Cheeto. It can be thought-provoking, but it's mostly just good fun to have these ideas stepped over quickly by the next, and since I'm the type of guy who likes rapid-fire ideas, not overstaying their welcome, I like this aspect of the show. But my favorite theme from this show was actually the idea of desolation and emptiness. Although we may live in a world that makes us and our actions seem minuscule, there is comfort and warmth in the fact that we can share our knowledge with others. But if I were to choose something to define this show by throughout its duration, I think it's about the archaic nature of infrastructure as a means to facilitate a society and its eventual destruction along with the people who inhabit and operate said infrastructure. I think there's plenty of reasoning to support this idea. Most notably, the massive destroyed buildings all around them displayed brighter than they probably would be in that kind of setting. At the scale of the society around them, and the height at this society peaked, it was only inevitable that this world and its people would crumble before its own magnitude. But despite the dark nature of this statement, the buildings are always capped in snow from the heavens, making the world seem purer and more innocent than it might have been before. The show doesn't really demand you take it as seriously as maybe I did, which is a plus to people that like to sit back and relax. Your taste will be catered to here, I think. If you don't want to think so hard, you don't really have to, because most of the show is free of strict interpretation, but personally I felt like the show was a lot more fulfilling when taking the questions posed and bringing them further than just the characters' brief discussions. And although I like the show to a large extent, it's not without faults along the way. Remember those ideas I was talking about earlier, like the question of afterlife and how it plays into our lives? Well, most of these questions require some boring setup beforehand. Some of the contextual setups are pretty well done, but most of them feel drowned out by the moe element that had to be overcome. Trying to blend moe with serious ideas doesn't blend too well all the time, believe it or not. I'm not saying that other shows do it better. I think it's better to think of it as these two things usually just don't work well together. Our characters, which are the people discussing these ideas, have really cute and squishy faces, which don't really help keep the consistency with what kind of tone should be most prevalent. To the show's defense, though, they do a good job of keeping the squishy moe parts out of the most serious sequences. Something else that also bothered me was the overarching theme of industrialization and war never being covered enough for my taste in the show. Sure, the show glances at this idea through the world and the characters sometimes acknowledging the idea as means to progress other ideas, but it never seems concrete why we even bothered to make this theme a primary element when it's barely even covered. To be fair, I think the approach was for more of a Western industrialized landscape rather than something more Japanese-inspired, but when I look back at most of the consolidated moments where the idea in question was 1,000% war and industrialization, we just gloss over it and pretty much call it a day. But where I think things become a little bit more complicated is explaining the entertainment factor behind this show. Did I find this show mentally stimulating? Sure, I did, as explained. Did I find the show to be pretty cute? Yeah, the characters have a pretty good dichotomy and are pretty excellently voice acted, in my opinion. But did I find the show entertaining? Sort of. I think it's hard to put in words how I feel about this fact. A lot of the nuances in this series are founded on the fact that this is primarily a slice of life, and I don't necessarily think it was the most entertaining part of the show. Rather, its presence was gratifying to break up and transition between ideas, but didn't really play a huge component as to why the show is actually good. You know, it's a pretty good show, despite these flaws, and I'm pretty confident to award this show the exact same score I gave the first time I watched it, which is a 7 out of 10. Thanks for watching.